Alright, here we go. Today we're going to be talking about my Kresh the Bloodbraided Commander deck. To see the full deck list all written out, go to puremtgo.com and look for my article series Conqueror and Commander, and you should see a nice little deck list there. This Kresh deck was actually recommended to me by my buddy Neo1992. He and I talk about decks a lot, and he put together a deck list based around Kresh that he thought that I'd really like. And as a matter of fact, I did. The basic idea was to play really big creatures and use those guys' abilities. And I took the deck list and I tweaked it a little more to the way I wanted to play it, but pretty much kept the whole outline the same. So I didn't really change it too much, and it's not technically my deck, but I changed it a decent amount, I think. So anyways, here's Kresh. He's a Jund guy, and essentially what happens is whenever another creature dies, it doesn't have to be your creature, you get to add +1/+1 counters to Kresh. And I've seen various strategies with Kresh, including, a lot of enters the battlefield guys, and, a lot of sacrifice effects and stuff like that. But I really liked this deck because it was based around just smashing with huge creatures. So let's just take a look down here at this column and see what we got. A lot of these guys are just big for their casting costs. Malignus, Hamlet-backed Goliath can get really big. Multani is generally really big. Runescarred Demon is big with a great enters the battlefield ability. Kokusho, this is my first time playing Cocoa Puffs since he's been unbanned, and he turned out to do really well in this deck. Hellkite Overload, not Charger, sorry. The Overlord is just good because he has haste. He's big and can regenerate. Vulturous Zombie was a card that I liked because, it didn't cost as much mana-wise as some of these other cards, and it could get big, although I never got it that big. But Lord of Extinction is basically your biggest threat in the deck. Phyrexian Dreadnought is a card that you can either use as a sacrifice outlet, or more typically, as a 1-mana +12/+12 permanent for Kresh. It's a nice little thing that was in the original deck that Neo sent me, and I kept it. In the original deck, there was also a couple other big guys like Molimo and Allosaurus Rider, and those guys just didn't make the cut because, you didn't always have the huge amount of lands that both of those cards needed. Stalking Vengeance works really well with all these guys as well, just because when you have huge guys die, being able to direct that damage specifically at certain ways is just a good idea. And of course, they all make Kresh bigger when they die. Now there's a couple of cards here, and I should actually just move these guys over here and move these guys right here. This group of cards is made to abuse the really big creatures. There are sorceries that can one-shot guys if you have a big enough creature out. Essence Harvest, Rite of Consumption, Soul's Fire, and Fling are all good ways to just sacrifice or use really large creatures to just knock people out of sight. And Heat Shimmer, of course, gives you 2 Lord of Extinctions for the price of 1. The good thing with the guys that sacrifice is, again, they make Kresh bigger. Now, that's the basic bare bones of the deck. You have kind of a couple other things that you need to do. Obviously, there's mana ramp, destruction, and card draw. So the mana ramp is all pretty standard stuff. Mana Crypt, Soul Ring, Solemn Simulacrum. Joraga's Tree Speaker actually worked out pretty well for me. This was my first time I played with it, and it wasn't bad. Hunting Wilds, all these guys are pretty standard. Green and Artifact ramp. The destruction here is important because, obviously the Marauder is good at making Kresh bigger. Pretty much a staple. Damnation. Dark Imposter, I like this card just because it manages to exile creatures with enough mana. Sever the Bloodline does the same thing with a flashback. Great for late game. Acidic or Scavenging Ooze Bojuka Bog, and Nihil Spellbomb are all in here because I do enjoy playing Living Death, and I don't like it. There's also Necrogenesis. There's a good amount of graveyard hate in this deck. I'm realizing right now. Mainly for Living Death. And then, you know, just having ways to blow up everything from Damnation to Oblivion Stone. Dreadbore I liked because I was running into Planeswalkers and I wasn't always able to attack them, and it's nice to be able to blow up a Planeswalker or a creature just right when you want to. The one card that underperformed in this deck was Grave Pact. I don't have a whole ton of sacrifice outlets in the deck, and so the Pact didn't always trigger. Obviously, if you do get it to trigger, it'll make Kresh big. But the deck doesn't necessarily need Kresh to survive or win. So I'm not sure the Pact is necessary. It's one of those cards that's a little, I don't know, a pain in the ass to play against. And if you want a more quote-unquote fair version of the Kresh deck, I guess I'd take Grave Pact out. Along with all those, we have a bunch of draw. Reforce the Soul and Wheel of Fortune are good because they can fill up graveyards to make Lord of Extinction bigger, and you know, this deck can also unload its hand pretty quickly. Hunter's Insight is great when you have huge guys out there, as is Greater Good. Momentous Fall, same thing. Harvester of Souls, a lot of creatures die. Kozilek is a card that I'm sort of iffy on including, but you know, he serves two purposes. The first is he can shuffle your graveyard back into your deck if you need it, and the second is he is a draw 4 in a late game for 10 mana, and you know, he's a big creature, and he's not, I don't know, I think he's probably like the least bad out of the Eldrazi legendary creatures. Obviously, not Ulamog. God, I'm blanking on the name of the big bad one. But Ulamog, I think, is more difficult to deal with, and therefore, I consider him, you know, harder, more of a pain in the ass than Kozilek. So I'm fine with Kozilek right now. You know, he ends games quickly if he sticks, and so there's always that as well. And then Skull Clamp is just a, you know, a good all-around card. Along with all these cards, we have some recursion in the form of Living Death, which is awesome. Living Death obviously combos well with Survival, and Survival's in this deck as well. Eternal Witness, Genesis, the Volrath Stronghold, Regrowth, and Noxious Revival are all good ways to get stuff back from your graveyard. Survival is just a beast in this deck. You'll notice that I am not playing with cards like Brawn or Filth or other cards, or the only incarnation I'm running is Anger, and I couldn't really fit them in the deck, and in all honesty I don't think I really needed to. They just weren't overly necessary for the deck to run. I'm only running two other tutors here, Vampiric and Demonic Tutor. You know, I guess it's possible if you really want to include a couple more tutors, you know, Imperial Seal or Grim Tutor and stuff like that, but I was fine with this. I don't like going overboard with my tutors, and honestly Survival is a big enough tutor out there to really get you going in whatever way you need. Finally, this is sort of like my catch-all extra cards. Rift Sweeper, because stuff does get exiled. Vampire Nighthawk is just a nice little bit of defense in the early game, and just a decent overall creature. Dragon Master Outcast I like because he can start just pumping out big dragons every turn for a low initial mana cost. Anger, I wanted to fit Urabrask in here as well, but you know, that was another card that just didn't make the cut. Kiki Jiki can copy some of your big fat, so that's always fun. And then the best part is the copies that you make get sacrificed, which makes Kresh bigger as well. And then Sneak Attack was a card that was recommended in the original version sent to me by Neo, and it turned out to be really good. Now, there's obviously times when you play it and you're not going to have a ton of fat creatures in your hand, but being able to sneak stuff out there for cheap is a nice little way to go, especially when you're cycling through your deck with a lot of draw and stuff like that. And then again, it also has the sacrifice the creature at the beginning of your next end step, which again makes Kresh bigger. So I liked Sneak Attack. Sneak Attack worked real well. The lands are your basic variety. You have Skarg and Kessig Wolfrun. Where is it? I don't know. It's in here somewhere. To give your big creatures trample. Shizo to give Kresh fear if necessary. Reliquary Tower because you do get some big hands sometimes. Spine Rock Knoll's pretty standard. Oh, Phyrexian Tower is a nice little sack outlet, as is Diamond Valley. Sometimes you will have big creatures and you'll need the life. Diamond Valley works out really well. There's Kessig Wolfrun right there. And then, a variety of other stuff. There are 37 lands in the deck and only 27 creatures, which might seem a little low in a Kresh deck, but this is a little more on the controlling side. You're running Maelstrom Pulse, plus Putrefly, plus Deadboar, plus Hull Breach, plus Acidic Slime, plus Crossing Grip. There's a lot of stuff here that kind of controls the board. Looking at the stats, hopefully it'll come up soon. Here we go. Your average CMC is 3.47, which is pretty good considering, I've got a 10 mana card in here. I bet if you got rid of Kozilek and put in, I don't know, some, Indrik Stomp Howler or something like that, you could knock this down if you really wanted to, but I'm fine with it as it is right now. Obviously you get a nice little curve going down like that, and most of the stuff you have in your deck's going to cost 3, but so once you hit that 6 mana mark, you should be able to cast 2 spells a turn most of the time, and it's a nice little even mix of all the stuff you're running. I always wonder where this stuff pops up every once in a while. There's no freaking white mana symbols in my deck, so I don't know what they're smoking here. A lot of Kresh decks run Planeswalkers. If you want, you could probably put in Garruk Wildspeaker to help with your draw. Oh, no, Garruk Primal Hunter. I'm sorry, Garruk Primal Hunter. Or you could put in, the guy that gives haste. Sarkhan Vol. I didn't really feel like I needed a ton of haste enablers, so I just didn't. I felt fine not having Urabrask in the deck. And that's the haste enabler I would prefer over Sarkhan Vol. But that's the deck, and it's a little more controlling than I think most Kresh decks are, but you know what? You do get the fat creatures out there that, just kind of squish people, and that's all you're looking for. This is a deck that would love to have Primeval Titan just so you could tutor for Skarg or Kessig Wolfrun at all times. But if you really need them, you can always use these 2 tutors. And Primeval Titan, I was a little sad to lose, but I initially thought of putting in Necropolis Regent or some of the stuff that was in my Skullbriar deck. But honestly, I just went with more card draw with Hunter's Insight, because the deck does run out of cards sometimes quickly. Alright, well that's the deck. I'm going to go ahead and show 2 videos of games, plus if you check out the article, there is one written out play-by-play version of another game. So hope you enjoy the deck. Thanks again to Neo. And this is for my 100th article of Conqueror and Commander. It's been a long time. Alright guys, thanks.